7 BYD vehicles are entering Canada in 2026, and they are already forcing Toyota, Tesla, and Hyundai to reprice their entire lineups before a single unit sells. Here is what most coverage gets wrong. The threat is not the range numbers or the horsepower figures. The threat is one specific number that insurers, dealers, and resale analysts are tracking right now, and it has nothing to do with the battery. That number gets answered before this video ends, but only after you understand why each of these 7 vehicles is built to attack a different weak point in the North American market simultaneously. The BYD Celion 6 opens this countdown because it is the vehicle most buyers overlook, and that oversight is a strategic mistake. It is a plug-in hybrid, which makes it categorically different from the rest of this lineup and more accessible than all of them. Canada's charging infrastructure is growing, but not uniformly dense. Rural buyers, northern communities, and households without home charging access face practical gaps that make a full BEV a real logistical challenge. The Celion 6 is BYD's argument that it understands that reality and is not asking every Canadian buyer to restructure their life around infrastructure that does not yet exist where they live. The target is the Toyota RAV4 Prime, one of the best-selling vehicles in Canada when inventory allows, and a vehicle that has had persistent supply constraints for years. BYD's DM hybrid system delivers electric range figures reported to compete with or exceed the RAV4 Prime's EV-only capability. The value camp sees a direct substitute at a lower price with more electric range. The risk camp sees a dual powertrain system maintained by a service network that is simultaneously learning both EV and hybrid service competency from a standing start in the Canadian market. The central fight for the Celion 6 is complexity risk. The rescue method is specific. Ask the dealer how many technicians at their nearest service location are certified for both the high-voltage electric system and the combustion components of this platform. If the answer is 1, that single point of failure is a real service availability risk. If the answer is 3 or more with documented certification, the risk is substantially mitigated. That question takes 30 seconds and tells you more than any review. The BYD Dolphin is the vehicle where the value versus capability argument is sharpest because the gap between what it does well and what it does not is wider than anywhere else in this lineup. It targets urban buyers in the subcompact hatchback space left largely vacant since GM discontinued the Bolt EUV. Limited competition in a segment is either an opportunity or a warning sign, and with the Dolphin, it is genuinely both at the same time. The value camp? For a buyer whose full use case is urban commuting under 60 kilometers per day with home charging, the Dolphin's reported range is sufficient, and its price point represents the most affordable entry into electric mobility from a brand with genuine EV engineering depth. The risk camp, the Dolphin's DC fast charging speed based on BYD's reported specifications for this platform is not competitive with the Ioniq 5 or the Model 3. A charging stop that a faster vehicle resolves in 20 minutes becomes 45 minutes in the Dolphin. Over a year of occasional longer trips that compounds into a real operational cost. Here is the question that resolves the debate for your specific situation. How many times in a typical year do you take a trip that requires a charging stop? If the honest answer is fewer than 6, the Dolphin's charging limitation is largely theoretical. If the answer is more than 12, the limitation is a measurable cost that does not appear on the window sticker. The Dolphin is not a compromised vehicle. It is a specifically scoped vehicle, and buyers who misread that scope will be dissatisfied for reasons that were available in the spec sheet before they signed. The BYD Han is the vehicle that reveals whether BYD is playing only in the value segment or is attempting to capture the full market. It is a full-size electric sedan with performance specifications that place it against the Tesla Model S and the BMW i5. Its exterior design is deliberately more conservative than other BYD products. In the premium segment, conservative styling is a trust signal, not a creative limitation, and BYD knows it. The fight for the Han is blunt. Does a premium buyer in Canada in 2026 have a rational reason to absorb service network uncertainty at this price point? The value camp says yes, because the specification advantage over a comparably priced BMW i5 is measurable, and the long-term ownership cost curve favors BYD's drivetrain architecture. The risk camp says that in the premium segment, the cost of a service failure is not just financial. A week without a vehicle at this price point is an experiential failure that erodes brand trust faster than it does in the volume segment. The 90-day variable to watch: how many BYD certified premium service locations are operational in the 5 largest Canadian metro areas by end of Q1 2026. If that number reaches double digits with verified staffing, the risk camp's argument weakens substantially. If it does not, the premium buyer is being asked to fund BYD's infrastructure development, and that cost does not appear on the window sticker either. The BYD Tang shifts the conversation to a 7-passenger electric SUV, placing it against the Kia EV9, and at the upper end, the Rivian R1S. The Tang's dual-motor AWD configuration is directly relevant for Canadian conditions. Its reported towing capacity, if confirmed at the figures BYD has cited in other markets, would position it unusually well for a Chinese EV in a segment where towing is a serious purchase variable for Canadian families, not an afterthought. The difficult moment the Tang cannot avoid is corrosion and long-term durability on salted Canadian roads. BYD does not have a multi-decade corrosion track record in Canadian winters the way Toyota does, or even the documented North American manufacturing quality history that Hyundai Kia has built over 20 years. The value camp accepts that absence of long-term data as the normal condition for any new market entrant and prices in the longer warranty as partial mitigation. The risk camp argues that corrosion failures in EV underbody components create costs that warranties may not fully cover in practice, particularly around battery enclosure integrity. The rescue method: before purchasing a Tang, request the specific underbody corrosion protection specification from the dealer. Compare it to what Kia publishes for the EV9. Then ask whether the warranty explicitly covers corrosion-related failures of battery enclosure components. The quality of the answer you receive to that third question is itself diagnostic data about the dealer's service readiness. The Auto 3 targets the compact electric SUV segment, the highest volume EV category in Canada, which puts it against the Tesla Model Y, the Hyundai Kona Electric, and the Chevrolet Equinox EV. This is the segment every mainstream Canadian family is shopping, which means this is where BYD's pricing pressure is most visible and most threatening to established players. The fight here is not about range or performance. It is about incentive eligibility, and that distinction matters more than most buyers realize until they see the final transaction price. The Equinox EV has a credible case for federal incentive qualification under Canadian content requirements. The Auto 3 as an imported vehicle faces a different eligibility landscape. The value camp argues that even without incentives, BYD's base pricing may undercut an incentive-adjusted Equinox EV. The risk camp argues that incentive eligibility is not a static condition, and the policy decisions over the next 18 months could move the effective price gap in either direction by thousands of dollars. The rescue method is straightforward and non-negotiable. Get the dealer to provide written confirmation of the vehicle's current federal and provincial incentive eligibility status before signing, not verbal confirmation, written. That documentation protects you if the status changes between order and delivery, which in the current Canadian policy environment is not a remote scenario. The 90-day variable to watch is federal government guidance on EV import tariff structures as they apply to Chinese manufactured vehicles. That single signal moves the Auto 3's effective price more than any negotiation at the dealership. The seal is BYD's direct answer to the Tesla Model 3 and the Hyundai Ioniq 6, and it opens the clearest head-to-head fight in this lineup. The value camp looks at the seal's reported dual motor range figures, its cell-to-body structural battery integration, and its heat pump as standard equipment, and concludes, this is a Model 3 at a materially lower transaction price. The risk camp looks at BYD's Canadian service infrastructure in 2026, still in early development, and asks what happens when something goes wrong at 80,000 kilometers. Both camps are making rational arguments. Here is how to evaluate which one applies to your situation. Heat pump performance in sub-zero temperatures is the comparison hook that matters most in Canada. The Model 3 has had a heat pump since 2021. The Ioniq 6 has one. The Seal has one. Heat pump availability is no longer a differentiator in this segment. The question is, calibration efficiency below -20 Celsius. And that answer only comes from owner data accumulated over a full Canadian winter, not from a manufacturer's spec sheet or a review conducted in a temperate climate. The rescue method is specific. Before purchasing, ask the dealer for the address and current staffing level of the nearest BYD certified service center for this platform. Then ask what the current parts lead time is for a high-voltage battery thermal module. Those two answers will tell you more than any road test. If neither answer is clear or documented, that ambiguity is itself the most important data point in the conversation. The Seagull is number one on this list not because it is the most capable vehicle in the lineup, but because it is the most consequential. It is sold at price points in other markets that have no current equivalent in the North American consumer EV space. If it reaches Canada in any configuration at or near adjusted international pricing, even accounting for import costs, Canadian regulatory compliance, and tariff structures, it creates a category that does not currently exist here. The closest structural analog is what the original Corolla did to the North American compact segment in the 1970s. That is not a rhetorical comparison. It is a description of what happens to an established market when a viable, lower price point appears for the first time. The difficult moment is the regulatory and tariff environment, which remains genuinely unresolved. Canada has followed a different policy path than the United States on tariffs for Chinese EVs, and the political dynamics around that decision are live and active. Whether the Seagull arrives in Canada in 2026 at a price that reflects its disruptive potential, or at a price normalized upward by tariff and compliance costs, is not yet determined. The value camp sees a vehicle that could make electric mobility accessible to buyers priced out of every EV currently on the Canadian market. The risk camp sees a geopolitical supply chain exposure and a regulatory environment that could shift the vehicle's effective price by 20 to 30% based on decisions made in Ottawa that have nothing to do with the car itself. The 90-day signal to watch is specific: Canadian federal government statements on tariff treatment for sub-segment Chinese EVs. That language, when it appears, will tell you more about the Seagull's Canadian viability than any road test, any review, and any spec comparison combined. Here is the payoff that was promised at the start. The number that insurers, resale analysts, and fleet managers are tracking across all 7 of these vehicles is not range. It is parts lead time. Specifically, the average number of days a BYD vehicle in Canada is off the road waiting for a component sourced from outside North America. That number, more than any range figure or performance specification, determines insurance risk classification, which determines premiums, which affects total cost of ownership, which affects resale value, which affects the financing decision at the point of purchase. Range is the number buyers care about. Parts lead time is the number that prices the vehicle's real-world ownership risk. BYD's parts localization strategy for Canada over the next 18 months will set that figure. If it comes in below the segment average for other imported EV brands, the risk camp across every vehicle on this list loses its strongest argument simultaneously. If it comes in above, the value camp's pricing advantage narrows or disappears when total cost of ownership is the honest measure. Canada's 2026 EV market is a controlled experiment with 7 vehicles as the variables. The evidence from that experiment, specifically which vehicles retain value, which generate repeat purchases, and which accumulate service complaints, will be the dataset U.S. buyers in northern states use to calibrate their own decisions in 2027. That pattern has played out with every major EV brand that used Canada as its North American proof-of-concept market. The debate that splits every serious buyer evaluating this lineup comes down to one question with two defensible answers. Is the buyer who purchases an established competitor's vehicle today, at a price not yet fully adjusted to BYD's market presence, making the more defensible financial decision? Or is the buyer absorbing early adopter risk now at a lower entry price, positioned for a longer ownership cost advantage that the other buyer will eventually pay a premium to access? One camp says the established brand's resale stability and service network is worth every dollar of that premium. The other says that premium is precisely what BYD was engineered to make feel irrational. Which camp you belong to probably says more about your risk tolerance than it does about any of these 7 vehicles.